Yeah, let's go ahead and get this party started. Hey, everybody. This is Matt Bird.
No, it's not. That's Steve Bird. I'm Matt Bird, and this is Marvel Reread Club.
I just figured I wanted to throw you a curveball for once there.
Indeed. Hi, everybody. So, welcome back to Marvel Reread Club. I hope we didn't lose any listeners from that last episode when we talked a little bit more about our emotional lives. I would like to think everybody can accept that and deal with it. We're both still emotional, but we're doing the best we can. We are going to have to talk a little bit about what's going on in this country tonight because of what's going on in Namor. But we're going to try to keep it to a minimum and try to keep this podcast as fun and exciting and happy as we can. Like I said last episode, I'm still hosting trivia every week. I'm still in charge of making sure a whole lot of college kids have a fun time, and I'm going to make sure all you guys have a fun time. That's my job. Make sure people have a fun time. So that's what I'm going to do. So let's go ahead and talk about one thing that, we lost a month in between our previous two episodes, and I had lost something that was very valuable to me, and then I could not find it while we were recording, and now I have found it, and that is the actual panel from our last issue of Thor. It was marked up seemingly by Saul Brodsky criticizing Vince Gilligan. You know me. You know I love to criticize Vince Gilligan. I love it when other people criticize Vince Gilligan. I love any of that I can get. So I had remembered it as being Gilligan really screwed this up. It's actually pointing to the sixth panel of the second page of Thor 139. I think it's a nicely inked panel of Sif teleporting herself and Thor back to Asgard with sort of ambitious hatching by Cleta, but someone who seems to have signed his name Saul, so presumably Marvel production editor Saul Brodsky, says VC ruined this inking. What do you think about that, Steve?
Yeah, I also disagree with the comment. At least, there's an arrow then pointing directly to that panel. Yes. You might have been able to say, this is just talking about this page and he doesn't like the page. And yeah, there are certainly some things on the page that you could argue with, as you can with most Vince Gilligan stuff. But if he's talking about that panel, then yeah, I strongly disagree. I think that has some interesting choices that I believe were successful.
Yeah. So I went ahead and I appended the page. It's watermarked heritagecomics.com from 2003, presumably because they were hosting an auction of this page. I highly recommend people go to marvelrereadclub.com, find the page for the previous episode of this podcast, and go ahead and look at the panel, which I posted there. Okay, everybody. Should we go ahead and jump into the comics of May 1967?
Well, it's a lot better than the jury duty I just got let out from. So yeah, let's go ahead and do it.
A lot better than jury duty. I can imagine a few choice things. I can imagine a few choice things you could have said to get out of jury duty. But
well, there's the old George Carlin bit about telling the judge that you can tell a guilty person just by looking at him because it's all in the distance between the eyes, and then you whip out a ruler and start measuring the judge.
Yes, or on 30 Rock, where she always goes dressed up as Princess Leia when she has to report for jury duty. Okay. Let's go ahead and do Amazing Spider-Man. I guess I did it last time, so you'll be doing it this time? I don't remember.
Why don't you do Spider-Man?
Okay, I kind of wanted to do Daredevil because it's the worst issue of Daredevil ever. But
okay. Yes, you are correct, sir. That is okay. I'll go ahead and do Spider-Man if you've got a lot of feels about Daredevil and want to get in there about that. All right. So The Wings of the Vulture. I did read this a little while ago, so I'm going to do my best to get through here. We see that Spidey is cold in the snow, which would make sense since you can see all of his rippling muscles through that. Through his costume, and so it's clearly not very thick material. Oh, but on the cover we see the Vulture from behind, and it says the Vulture's back and Spidey's got him, but we notably do not see his head because we're looking at him from behind, and that is important for what we're about to see. So
once we do see his head, we'll know that it's not true to say the Vulture's back. It would be more accurate to say the new Vulture is here. But
a vulture is back.
A Vulture's back. They seem to be hiding the fact on the cover that they have switched out. So it seems like with this issue that you've got Romita coming in going like, why was Ditko so weird? Why did he have this wrinkled old villain? Why can't we have a young, strapping, robust young villain to replace the wrinkled old villain? And then Stanley is like, I don't know. I don't know, Johnny. I think people liked the old Vulture. I tell you what, when you do the cover, go ahead and hide the fact you replaced him.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Credits: An awesome aggregation of airborne thrills by Smilin' Stan Lee and jazzy John Romita, learnedly lettered by Whammy Sammy Rosen. So, Spider-Man is patrolling the city looking for Kraven after the events of last issue. It has started to snow, and as I said, he is getting very cold, which would make sense, swinging around with a lot of wind whipping past you as you're swinging through the city with very little insulation.
Yes.
So he's swinging all around and somehow ends up at so-called municipal prison. I do not know if this would be analogous to anything in real-world New York, but
Well, it's utterly bizarre because, as in so many cases of how could Spider-Man swing there, it is made very clear later on in this issue that this prison is surrounded by grounds. It's made very clear that the Vulture has buried his costume out in the grounds of the prison. So how do you swing to a place that is surrounded by grounds? It makes no sense. And it makes no sense that there would be a prison so close to New York that you could accidentally swing there without paying attention. No sense. No sense.
And storytelling wise, we only had Spider-Man get there so that we could have this transition to a view from inside the prison. You wouldn't necessarily have had to do that, but I guess that John Romita decided that that would make the most storytelling sense. We see that the old man who has been the Vulture is dying in prison. And there's this other prisoner named Blackie something or other, who has somehow gotten the information out of the Vulture about where his wings and his costume have been stashed, because he wants Blackie to take out Spider-Man for him.
It's Blackie Drago, Drago. The Vulture, Adrian Toomes, says, well, I got accidentally injured in the prison yard, and so now I'm going to go ahead and tell you what you've been wanting to know, where to find my costume and how to escape and beat up Spider-Man. And then after Adrian Toomes finally tells Blackie this, Blackie's like, oh, by the way, I caused that accident. I am the one who sent you to the hospital and presumably to your death. So see ya. Goodbye.
Okay. Thank you. It's been a little while since I read this one in particular. So Blackie Drago, or Drago, or however you want to pronounce it, is able to escape from the prison just by knocking out a guard and taking a vehicle here. Last panel on page 5 makes it look almost like it's a hearse, but I don't think it is. He's able to drive to the spot in the snow where the Vulture costume is buried, gets it out, and starts flying around. Although, I always like it when somebody gets some new technology, and even though we've seen other characters use it with ease and expertise, this new character is like, oh, wait, what the heck am I doing with this? And it takes a minute for them to get it, which we see here with Blackie Drago and the wings. It doesn't take him long, but it at least isn't the first panel.
Yeah, I think Romita does an excellent job of showing somebody using wings for the first time that wouldn't know how to use them. But it is a little, given that people are actively shooting at him the entire time from a few feet away, it's still a little unbelievable that he would learn fast enough to get away from that. But at least Romita is doing his job in terms of showing that he's really struggling with the wings.
Yes. Now, there are a couple of panels in the sequence I just went by here where I saw some possible influence of John Romita on a more modern artist that I'd never noticed before. And you tell me if I'm making this up. So Blackie Drago's face on the first panel of page 5 and the foreground cop's face in panel 4 of page 6. Both of them look kind of like Dave Gibbons to me.
I was about to say it. I was hoping you would quiz me this time because I was going to say Dave Gibbons.
Yeah. Okay, so you're not. So I'm not the only one. That is, yeah. I had never noticed a Romita influence on Dave Gibbons before, but now suddenly I'm like, oh wow, yeah, that's. So we then see that Spider-Man seems to have caught a cold, I believe, or at least is not feeling good after swinging around in the cold the other day. So I know you always like it when Spider-Man's sneezing in his mask and stuff. So,
yeah. It's a little bit much this time. He's like actually feverish and he's got like stars in his eyes the entire issue. And I'm like, okay, dude, you are really sick this time. I usually like to see you fight sick, but I think you are too sick to fight, dude.
Yes. So, and everyone's just like, dude, go home. What are you doing? So we later see him at home, and he sees a news report
Well, wait.
about Spider-Man. I'm sorry?
Wait, I don't think I can skip over the bottom of page 7. We see, for one thing, Gwen Stacy's new haircut, where she's trying to look more like Mary Jane, and looks completely off model without her headband or her devil horn barrettes, and won't keep this hairstyle for long. But also, we have one panel that is the birth of the entire Clone Saga, because we see for the first time Peter and Gwen and Professor Warren all in the same panel, all in a science classroom. We will later find out, much later, that Professor Warren then became obsessed with Gwen and cloned her. And then it turned out he cloned Peter as well. So we have the birth of the whole Clone Saga in panel 7. Now, of course, it's a problem that Peter also had a high school science teacher named Warren, who seems to have been an entirely different character. So just by sheer coincidence, or perhaps Stanley getting confused, he had both a high school and college teacher named Warren. But the high school teacher seems to have been a different character. This is his college professor, Mr. Warren, who will very much later become the Jackal and be behind the entire Clone Saga.
I did not remember any of that stuff, so thank you for bringing that up. And of course, there were 2 Clone Sagas, basically, right? There is one in the 70s, and then one later in the 90s.
Yes.
And the one in the 90s just went on and on and on and on and on. Is one of the more dubious moments of 90s Marvel comics. Okay, so we see J. Jonah Jameson doing some kind of TV news editorial about Spider-Man and Kraven, and of course, he's making Spider-Man look bad and all this. But then as part of this whole news program, he sees that the Vulture has taken off. And Pete's like, oh, man, I need to deal with this, but I just feel terrible. What am I going to do? So he, of course, is going to do the right thing, because with great power, there must come great responsibility. But Blackie Drago is like, why did the other guy fly around without his head covered? This makes no sense. I'm going to go make a cool looking cowl. So yeah, Blackie Drago is getting a little bit ahead of himself. He's like, nothing can stop a man with wings. The city and all its wealth are mine. Everything I desire is mine, just for the taking. Even Spider-Man hasn't dared to show himself. And it's just like, dude, you have a pair of wings. It's like, flying is great, but you're not invincible. Come on. Spider-Man, so he's like, oh, geez, no, I gotta go, but I'm just falling down with fever and fatigue. I'm going to call Matt Murdock and see if he can go do this job as Daredevil. And he's like, no, I'm going to go out and do it.
So he talks about calling Daredevil in this issue, and he guest starred in the most recent issue of Daredevil, but Daredevil never said to Spider-Man, like, thanks for writing a letter to me saying that you knew my secret identity, a letter that was intercepted by 2 people I love, and now I had to invent a twin brother in order to fool them. Thanks a lot for sending that letter. There's never been any confirmation that was a real letter, and presumably it was, because no villain has come forward to claim it. And, there's never been any fallout from that extremely dumb letter that Peter sent.
So sick Spider-Man ends up coming out here to try to fight the Vulture. Somehow they end up on one of the bridges. It's always, as once again, you see the shot on page 13 of where the bridge is in relation to any tall buildings. And then a moment later, you see him on the bridge. It's like, again, how did you get there? Do you jump on the top of a car and then run up the suspension wires?
Yeah, that's presumably what he does. At least it shows him crawling up the bridge instead of swinging down on atop the bridge. So I give them credit for that.
Yes. So Spider-Man recognizes this is not the original Vulture that he fought. Of course, the only reason this Vulture is able to really give him a run for his money is because Spider-Man is sick as a dog, as they say. We see a brief interlude where Aunt May, Mary Jane, and Mrs. Watson all come by to Peter's new apartment to see him. Harry Osborn answers the door and says, oh yeah, Pete's been really sick, but when I got home, he wasn't here, so he must be feeling better, and he's out. And they're all, okay, that's fine. Great. He's doing well. So the fight between Spider-Man and Vulture continues, and in the end, Vulture seems to have really defeated Spider-Man. So at the end of the issue, we see Spider-Man in a really almost dead-looking pose on top of a snowy roof as the new Vulture flies off victorious. And it says, to be continued?
I think the word you were looking for was Christ-like.
Maybe.
really beautiful panel of Spider-Man laid out in this Christ-like fashion atop of a snowy rooftop with the other snowy rooftops behind him. And boy, oh boy, he really seems like he's down for the count here. Really beautifully penciled, inked, and co-plotted by Romita and scripted by Lee, which is to say not scripted by Lee, because it's a silent final panel that's really sort of haunting. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, give Lee credit for his restraint.
Yes. I wasn't kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you say Christ-like. His legs don't quite make it for me, but I can see what you mean. Other than his legs being bent in a position where that wouldn't be. Yes, I can see what you're talking about. So, anyway, this is a great issue. I'm a big fan of it. Lots of fun, great art, well-paced, and moving the subplots along in the background. And I don't necessarily like the change in the look of the new Vulture, but that is a minor quibble.
And as it will turn out, Adrian Toomes will not die. He will come back. He will take over the Vulture position again. And it will be really weird to look back on these issues going like, why was the Vulture so robust? But of course, Romita likes to draw everybody a little more robust than Ditko did. But even so, it's like he seems really suspiciously robust. And indeed, it's a different person. I love this issue. I'm glad we got the original Vulture back, but I don't mind at all having this substitute. And Romita is just really killing it on the pencils and inks. He's killing it with the snow. So I did go back and I finished listening to all of our old podcasts, and occasionally we'll just say really dumb stuff that's not true. And one of the dumb things that I said that wasn't true is Romita, if you recall, wasn't inking himself on the first several issues of Spider-Man he did. And I said, I don't think he'll ever ink himself on Spider-Man. I don't know why the hell I would say that. He clearly inks himself on Spider-Man, and I'm so glad he is. This is a beautifully penciled, beautifully inked issue, and I just love the snow. I love all of the weather in this issue.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to worser things.
Let's move on to possibly the greatest comic of all time, Daredevil 28. So, oh my God. So, there'll be a Fantastic Four issue this month where they talk about coincidence. And like, look, Raider, a huge coincidence. But it was a good example of how coincidence works. And usually when a coincidence happens in a Jack Kirby story, it works. Or a Steve Ditko story for that matter. They both use coincidence correctly and well. Then you have this story, which is written. It says the issue is made by Stanley and Gene Cohen. Doesn't say who plotted it. Let's assume that Gene Cohen is doing most of the plotting, and let's assume that this is a truly horrifically plotted issue. Right away from the cover, you're like, is that Daredevil versus aliens? That doesn't sound like a good idea. Indeed it is. And I was hoping from this cover, like it says, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's planet. And it has aliens who have frozen Daredevil in a block of ice and they're dragging him off. I saw this cover. I'm like, I hope that that's people in rubber suits pretending to be aliens. And indeed, throughout most of the issue, it seemed like they would be people in rubber suits pretending to be aliens. But no, they're actually aliens. So before we get into the horribleness on the writing of this issue, let's talk about the horribleness of the art. It says, now look, Dad, we went to a lot of trouble to hire these guys, so be sure to memorize their names here. Philosophically produced by Smilin' Stan Lee and Genial Gene Cohen, inked by Dick Ayers, lettered by Sammy Rosen. So, Steve, I owe you an apology. I've been defending Ayers for the many years we've been doing this podcast. And have you noticed in this issue, Dick Ayers seems to have been written in by somebody different who wrote in Stan Lee, Gene Cohen, and Sam Rosen?
Yeah, you're right.
It does, doesn't it? Looks like maybe Dick wrote that in himself, because it looks like maybe they didn't know who was going to ink this issue, because Frank Giacoia, the usual inker in this issue, seems to have not been available. And at the last minute, and I mean last minute, they got Dick Ayers to ink it and write in his own credit, because this issue is terribly inked and seems to have been done slapdash at the last second. I could point out 50 different panels in this issue that look like, as you say, inked with a mop. But you have frequently criticized Dick Ayers as being an inker who sometimes looks like he inks with a mop. That's certainly true of a lot of panels in this issue. But also, a lot of it just looks like it was done by a 5-year-old. If you look at page 3, panel 3, where Daredevil is swinging around town, like, I'm not going to blame Cohen for that. I'm going to blame Ayers for that. Really looks like it was done by a 3-year-old. Just awful.
Yeah. Okay. One thing I will say, and I've always been hot and cold on Ayers. It's like sometimes the Ayers with a mop shows up, and sometimes the Ayers with a nice brush shows up. Yes, this is one of the lesser outings by Dick Ayers. But I will say, Cohen is a notoriously hard penciler to ink.
Yes.
And some people can pull it off surprisingly well. Giacoya and Abel both seem to have figured out how to do it with aplomb. But yes, in this case, we can see that Dick Ayers is not one of them. And I have seen sample Gene Colan pencil Xerox pages out there. I have never attempted to ink one of those. I'm not going to try it.
Yeah.
I am not a talented enough inker to give that a try, even just for funsies. So I will give Dick Ayers that out.
We may not have mentioned in a while on this podcast that you used to be a professional inker for mainly DC Comics.
Yes.
We begin this episode, last issue, they promised Mike Murdock would die. He did not. Here is Matt Murdock pretending to be his insufferable twin brother, Mike Murdock, sitting around in a loud suit and loud hat and loud sunglasses, juggling for no reason on Karen's desk. Can you imagine this guy just comes and, your boss, pretending to be your boss's obnoxious twin brother, comes and sits on your desk and you're sitting there rolling your eyes going like, well, she's actually upset with Matt Murdock for having consigned Mike to die due to a, as you might imagine, very zany mix-up. But,
and in that first panel on page 2, one thing I didn't realize first time reading through this is Karen is leaning on a drawer that's pulled out from a file cabinet. And that drawer it's like it's about to fall out.
Yes.
It's what the heck is going on with that? That's, as you said, I don't think that Gene Colan cares too much about this book. Also, while we're paused, I will say that the middle panel on the bottom of page 2, so the third panel on the page, first of all, Mike Murdock, so-called, refers to his longtime friend and partner as Chubbins, which is just like, dude. And the other thing he says, well, hello there, D-E-R-E. And I have in the past, when there has been another reference to hello there, I speculated on what that might be referring to, and I was incorrect and couldn't even come up with the name of the incorrect thing that last time. But I thought this was Lew Lehr, Lewlehr, who did a lot of silly shorts back in the day when you had shorts before movies, and his humor is mainly remembered just because it was referenced a lot in Looney Tunes and in Woody Woodpecker cartoons. So people know his humor but don't know who it is. However, I am pretty sure I was wrong on that, and this is a reference to comedian Marty Allen, where hello there was his signature phrase. So anyway, once again, for old cultural references that would be lost even to you and me, there you go. This is probably a Marty Allen reference.
All right. So, his partner comes in and he says, well, hello there, Chubbins. Yeah. And it's like, can you imagine if an actual client walked in like, hi, I'm here to hire Matt Murdock, world's greatest attorney. You clearly are Matt Murdock, pretending to be someone else. And you are sitting on your secretary's desk. Your secretary is leaning on a file cabinet that's about to come crashing down on her. I am not hiring any of you people. Goodbye. But so then, meanwhile, Chubbins, Foggy Nelson, is taking Karen out on a hansom cab ride with a horse clomping around Central Park. And Daredevil jumps in just to imply once again he is Mike Murdock so they don't suspect he's Matt. It's all very, very dumb and very, very poorly inked by Dick Ayers. Presumably, the penciling was okay by Colan. But oh my God, look at the last panel on page 6. Really, I mean, look at just Daredevil's logo. Look at nothing else other than Daredevil's logo.
Yeah, that's terrible. But the last panel on page 5 makes it look like Karen got into the heroin several years earlier. Yes. She just looks so zoned out. Or maybe at that point, starting out with Valium there. That's kind of what she looks like. Okay.
So once again, they're calling the reader Frantic One, which is a very big thing that has been going on in every Marvel comic. Why would you call your reader Frantic One? That's an odd thing to refer to your reader as. So then we get one of the dumbest plot turns in the history of Marvel Comics. So where they want to go with this story is that Daredevil is on a college campus where one of the professors is obsessed with aliens when suddenly, by sheer coincidence, that professor is indeed attacked by aliens and Matt has to investigate. That's fine. That's a huge coincidence that a professor obsessed with aliens gets attacked by aliens. But, it's the sort of coincidences that you make stories out of. However, there is another huge coincidence, and that is that Matt has been called to the campus to lecture about aliens. Matt Murdock has been called to fly way out of town to a college campus to lecture about aliens. Matt knows nothing about aliens. This is not his area of expertise. The story would have worked just fine if he had been called there to lecture about my life as a blind lawyer. And he's called in and they're like, hey, we've never seen him on the lecture circuit before, but okay, we're going to have him come lecture about his life as a blind lawyer when, turns out there's a professor who's obsessed with aliens and then actually uncovers aliens. You could also make that less of a coincidence by having the aliens, seeking out people like, oh, we're afraid you know about us, so we're going to track you down. But why is he lecturing about aliens?
And in his lecture, there's a caption that says, a few minutes later, a tall commanding figure mounts the podium as the voice which has swayed judge and jurors alike in courtrooms throughout the nation begins to speak. I'm like, what? He has a 3-person law office in New York City.
Yes.
While we're at it, I just wanted to say that when you were pointing out bad panels on page 6, the first panel on page 6, the profile of Karen's face on that is one of the ones that I clipped just to be like, oh my God, that one is a disaster. That's probably what it would look like if I tried to ink : right there is that panel. And then the panel after it, Foggy looks very much like the actor they got to play him in the Netflix series.
Yeah, he does. All right. So then, bizarrely, they call in Matt to lecture about aliens. Bizarrely, there's also a professor who's obsessed with aliens. Bizarrely, he also gets attacked by aliens. I'm going to start zipping ahead here. This is dumb as a box of rocks. Finally, Matt changes into Daredevil. He's investigating the aliens. It turns out these aliens have two things. One is that they have a blindness ray, and the other thing is that they have a freeze ray. I wish these two things had something in common with each other. Blindness and freezing generally don't. I was still hoping these were going to turn out to be crooks in rubber suits, and indeed they look like crooks in rubber suits, but they don't. So then they end up using their blindness ray on like the whole world. Yeah, it's literally the whole world because we see people all over the world turning blind and they're all speaking in fonts that resemble their language, which is kind of fun.
The letterer had a lot of fun with that.
The letterer had fun. And I kind of like the idea, we see Karen and Foggy who are driving up. They seem to have written down the date wrong because they're belatedly driving up to see Matt speak, but he's already done. And we see them suddenly become blind as they're driving. I like the idea of a bad guy in Daredevil turning the whole world blind. And then, in the land of the blind, only Daredevil would be the one who would be able to get around. I kind of like that idea. But hoo boy, is it wasted in this idiotic issue. Finally, Daredevil gets unfrozen. The whole world can see again. And then Karen, who was loving up on Mike at the beginning of the issue, is now loving up on Matt and cannot tell they're the same person. Oh my God, what a terrible issue. Absolutely disaster art, absolutely disaster writing. Just terrible. What did you think of this issue, Steve?
Yes, this thing was a train wreck from beginning to end. Two short things I want to mention. One, they never bring up the idea that, I think even as a kid reading this, I would think, so everyone driving on the highway was suddenly blind? Everyone flying a helicopter was suddenly blind. I think that there are going to be some more consequences to this than just, oh, wow, remember that moment when we all went blind for about 2 minutes? And then the other thing is when he is going into action as Daredevil at this college that Matt Murdock had to fly to lecture at, he's saying to himself, I've just got to hope that no one gets too suspicious about Daredevil popping up out of town at the same place as Matt Murdock. And they do in the following panel make some kind of gesture towards, oh, well, I said, Mike Murdock told these guys that he might be heading up there, so maybe they'll figure it out. Yeah, well, no one figured it out when you went to Lichtenbad and then suddenly Daredevil showed up. That nobody figured out when you went on a cruise, which was then attacked by the Plunderer, and Daredevil showed up, fought the Plunderer, and then took Daredevil off, and presumably there was a person missing from the manifest named Matt Murdock when this ship returned. Nobody noticed when you once again went missing and then showed up in London at the same time as Daredevil showed up. So I think you're good. I don't think anyone's going to figure this out.
Yeah, I think we'll be fine.
Or they've all figured it out and they're like, dude, this moron thinks that we haven't figured this out.
Yes. Oh, what a terrible issue. I will never defend Ayers again, ever. I will. Next time I see Ayers, I will slap him full in the face.
That is not fair. He can do a good job sometimes. It's just like Coletta can do a good job on occasion, and I will point it out when he does.
Well, again, I'm just completely relying on the fact that his name seems to have been written in a different hand in the last second. So I'm like, okay, he had to do this job in 2 hours. And that's the only explanation. So we will hopefully still see some good inking out of errors. Something clearly went very wrong here.
I believe so. All right, so The Mighty Thor, number 140, The Growing Man, which I wish they had picked a better name for that.
Yeah.
That sounds like that is out of an ad from Hims. Anyway.
I got a lot of those ads.
Well, we're both 50-ish men. We're going to be getting a lot of those ads. The Growing Man, in which one of Earth's deadliest enemies returns with the most uncanny threat of all. So after the vanquishing of the troll army, we've got this big ceremony with pomp and circumstance that Odin is leading here, presumably to celebrate the victory in the war.
So it certainly seems to me, so we've got Odin climbing this regal staircase to join Thor on this stage, but it certainly seems to me like Jack Kirby would have actually penciled all the cut-ins for these stairs, and that Vince Guerra has just erased all of that and makes it look like Odin is walking up a slide instead of walking up a staircase. It's funny, on the very last page of this issue, at the end of Tales of Asgard, there's a similar panel in which the cut-ins are in there because it's a smaller staircase. But this one, I'm totally blaming Coletta for the fact this looks like a slide instead of a staircase.
Yeah, it looks like he is basically being brought up on a diagonal conveyor belt there.
Yeah.
So this issue was conceived and created by the noblest collaborative combo in comicdom, Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby. Inking by Vince Coletta, lettering by Sam Rosen. So as I was saying earlier, and it's been bothering me more and more, and who knows how much that has to do with just me reading this and seeing more of it, and how much of it has to do with other things that are going on, but I really kind of get bothered by these heroic figures that are parts of absolute monarchies, where, you know, there is, it bothers me. Anyway, and also everybody is out there yelling, "Hail Asgard," as they hold up their weapons in their right hands, which, I mean, yes, this is two Jewish men doing this. I know that is not at all, but still, it's just, it bothers me. So, we get to see Odin taking a bath. That's always, always a fun thing.
Yes, he has taken a bath in the Pool of Peace. It is it is like he has gone to Great Wolf Lodge Water Park or something. It looks like Dr. Seuss's mustard off pools from Happy Birthday to You.
Okay, thank you. I was about to say he's in the mustard off pool. Yes, from Dr. Seuss's birthday book, which you read to your kids every year when they were young, correct?
No, our parents would read it to us every year when we were young. But no, I guess that's true. I did used to read it to my kids when they were very young. That's true.
Okay, so anyway, some museum has somehow turned up, and it's a little unclear where the museum is and how it is they got possession of this thing. But this humanoid doll, originally, it says in the dialogue yesterday it was like a figurine, but now it is like a largish human being. Like not abnormally large, but large. As they're examining it, he is getting a little bit bigger as they touch and, sort of knock on him and poke at him. The cops are there. They start trying to shoot at him. Everything that happens to him just makes him get bigger and bigger. He is getting bigger fast. Now, on the bottom of page 5, panel 3, where in New York City is this supposed to be? Or are we in New York City at all? Because they were a little bit unclear when it comes to where this museum is, but in a moment they're going to be in New York City. So if this is New York City, where would that be right here?
Yes, the Growing Man is tearing up a traditional house on a traditional white picket fence street, and makes no sense at all that someone emerging from a New York museum would be there.
Yes.
Yeah, makes no sense.
And again, presumably a New York museum, although it's kind of unclear. So we might be able to give him a pass on that. So Thor is like, okay, I got to go back to Earth because I haven't been into Earth in, geez, how long? So Sif is like, hey, okay, well, I'm going with you, right? And he's like, no, baby, you got to stay here. I got to go do some man stuff. She is, not particularly happy about this, but he goes ahead and heads back to New York. And they try to play off the whole thing that, Dr. Don Blake hasn't been here for God knows how long. in that he's at one point saying to himself as he looks through some paperwork, my files are all in order. Luckily, my other physician friends and associates filled in for me during my absence. It's hard to believe I've only been gone a few days. Yes, it is very hard to believe.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I do not believe it for a moment.
Oh, God, yes. I mean, when was the last time he was in his office? It must have been at least 12 issues ago. It's been that entire 12 issues of comics took place in just a couple of days. But I got to say, Steve, you skipped over the top of page 7. Where's the perspective point there? Where is the vanishing point of that particular 3-point perspective? If you had to put dots for that 3-point perspective, looking down at the buildings of New York here on top of page 7, where would you put those dots?
Yeah, probably for the left half of the panel, I could figure it out. But then when you include the right half of the panel where everything just looks like a jumble of blocks, I'm not quite sure.
Yes, it looks like Atandra has been given some, cityscape blocks to play with and spilled them in a big jumble across the table. I love it. I love this panel, but it's a sign of like, this is just Kirby giving the FU to perspective and going like, I am Jack King Kirby. I can do whatever the hell I want to do when it comes to perspective.
Well, and I mean, that could also very well be a lot of Coletta in there. It could be that if you saw the Kirby page, it would make a lot more visual sense and have a little bit more coherence. And that Coletta was just like, man, this thing's a mess. I'm just going to go ahead and scribble it out.
Yeah.
We see more of the growing man fighting cops, and then we see a sci-fi gun being pointed from around a tree that then zaps the growing man. And again, page 10, top panel, I kind of like what Coletta is doing in that panel in terms of this ray hitting the growing man and having a big amount of force indicated. What do you think of that panel? Do you like that, or do you not like that?
I don't like it.
I could see it going either way, but I do like it. So anyway, this is apparently Kang. Kang was just hitting the growing man with his ray that shrinks him back down to the size of a doll. Apparently, for some reason, Kang had buried this doll in our time period, so it would be ready for him to come and use at some other point in time. Again, I really don't think Kang understands exactly how time travel works. But then somehow there's all this stuff about people just seeming to pretend that they don't know people's secret identities. They come and get Dr. Don Blake because it's like, yeah, well, you seem to have been able to contact Thor in the past. We think we need Thor, so come along with us. And he gets there and he's just like, oh, let me just go back here where people will clearly still be able to see the explosion and turn into Thor. So they're like, okay, good. We massage his ego to let him think that we don't know, but we all clearly know. So Thor is fighting the growing man, which makes the growing man grow once again. Then Kang comes in and he starts fighting Thor one-on-one, explains what his whole plan was with the growing man, grabs the growing man, jumps back into his time machine, which is disguised as a rather large boulder, which you would think anyone familiar with this area would notice if this thing just showed up one day.
Yeah.
So he time travels, but wait, did Thor time travel him? Wait a minute. Do your worst, Thunder God. I've beaten you at last. Not so, Conqueror. My mallet need not penetrate thy field of force, so long as it can whirl around thee at a speed far greater than light, which, okay, that seems like that would be a problem in Earth's atmosphere. Okay, here it is. So Mjolnir, which is misspelled here on the 4th panel in page 16, Mjolnar, thou hast placed yon time machine within a universal infinity vortex, and since naught can long endure in a faster than light continuum, there must occur a cataclysmic displacement. The evil one shall never reach the future, for he is now beyond all time, beyond all place, and there they shall stay. The man, the Stimuloid, which is what they're calling growing
Stimuloid.
man. And Stimuloid, sorry. Yes, the Stimuloid, because he grows by stimulus. And the forever shattered dream of conquest. Now, this seems like it might not be a good idea since, if you do consider Kang a master of time travel, maybe sending him to a place that is beyond time might be a place where he could figure some stuff out. Also, It does remind me a fair amount of the Loki miniseries when they were trying to set up Kang as the new big bad for the new cycle of Marvel movies before all of the unfortunateness happened.
Yeah. Is it just me, or is the ending of this issue, is it like identical to the ending of an old Journey into Mystery, where I think he was maybe finding Zarko the Tomorrow Man, who maybe had, once again, a boulder disguised as a time machine, and once again, Thor sent it into a vortex with his hammer by whizzing his hammer around it? Or am I just thinking of this issue? I get confused because I've read these so many times, but
I don't know. I couldn't tell you, but yeah, the ending does feel very much like a Zarko the Tomorrow Man kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't say for sure.
This issue. So first of all, when Thor is arguing with Sif, we're supposed to side with Sif, right? I mean, we want this book to stay in Asgard. We want him to stay with Sif. Sif's great. Asgard is great. We don't want to see Don Blake again. We never want to see Don Blake again. And he is totally being a dick to Sif, and she is being stiff upper lip about it. I love her face on page 6, where she's just like, then be thou gone, begging ill becomes the sister of Heimdall. Like, you really think the sister of Heimdall is going to come begging to you, dude? I don't think so. Totally on her side.
I saved your ass from getting hit by a subway just like a day ago. It's like, what are you being like? Oh no, this is not woman's work.
Yes. This is, the weakest issue we've had in over a year on this book, I would say, even though Kang is a worthy villain, and it's fine for him to be fighting Kang, but this is just a really lame Kang story. And they sort of turn it into, for no good reason, a Dr. Blake story, which it doesn't need to be and shouldn't be. It's funny. We've been meaning to have George O'Connor on, who's doing his own Asgardian comics now, and had said he wants to come on the show. And every issue, I'm like, oh, this is a great Thor issue. It would have been great to have George O'Connor on. This is the first one in a long time where I'm like, nope, I'm glad we didn't have him on. This is a lame Thor issue. There is not a lot of Asgardy goodness in here, although there is Asgardy goodness. The throne on the first page is an awesome Kirby throne. And the Pool of Peace is absolutely awesome. And at one point when you were talking, a completely different Dr. Seuss book came into my head where the Onceler says, and I'm figuring on biggering and biggering and biggering and biggering. So the Growing Man is also figuring on biggering and biggering and biggering. Okay, let's get to Asgard.
Okay, The Battle Begins is the title here. A glory-drenched masterwork by Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby, inking Vince Colletta, lettering Sam Rosen. So we are in the middle of this ongoing story with the Warriors 3 and Thor going to do battle with the enemy of Hogan, and this is in this sort of pan-Asian mishmash culture that is adjacent to Asgard here. So, or adjacent, basically, accessible to Asgard. So,
Yes.
And it's one of those things where if this exact story came out today, there would be a lot of bones to pick with the cultural mishmash that we're getting here. But for 1967, I don't think it's a problem. So Thor and the Warriors 3 were just about to start fighting the genie. So we have a battle with the genie. Hogan is like, no, this must be my battle, and I'm going to use my mace, which seems like an ineffective weapon to use against this giant genie. Basically, there's a big old battle, and then we switch to seeing inside Mogul's fortress, basically, which is in this inverted mountain underneath a wasteland. So he is going and grabbing his own battle standard, and it looks like he is now preparing to fight these warriors who are clearly going to defeat his genie. And at the end of this story, we see Thor and the Warriors 3 heading down into an opening into this inverted mountain where they are going to do battle. And it says, next, Ali Bar and the 40 Demons. So once again, going into generally any part of Asia mythology here. So
Yes.
Clearly a reference to Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves.
Yes, it is interesting. So all sorts of things to say about this. The first page is like really shockingly well inked by Coletta. Like the fist that's slamming down on them feels really solid and is actually coming in contact with the ground, which Coletta often can't do. It almost feels like Romita might have touched up this first page, but I don't know. I'm not gonna.
I don't think so.
I'm not gonna say that. I was not a big fan of Jason Aaron's Jane Foster as Thor storyline, which lasted 3 years, nor was I a big fan of the movie they made from that storyline. But there were good things about those comics. They were generally pretty well illustrated. And one fun idea they had is that when Jane uses the hammer, she would use it in a completely different way than Thor Odinson used the hammer. And she would have it sort of fly around the room upright and sort of, zip around hammering away at people. And it was really neat, and it was a really clever idea to have her use it in a different way. But the way she uses it is similar to the way it's used on page 2, panel 1 of this story. And that reminded me of that, which was fun. I got to say, I absolutely love the advisor's hat on page 4, panel 2. That advisor on page 4, panel 2 has one hell of a hat. It is.
The hat is larger than his entire torso.
Yes, the hat is almost as tall as he is. And I do like how Coletta on the very first page couldn't be bothered to ink the cut-ins on the stairs, but on the very last page he does.
So that was me. I guess that means you are taking Tales to Astonish.
Womp womp. Issue neither of us want to talk about. We'll just get through it very quickly. The Incredible Hulk, the Submariner, Tales to Astonish, featuring the Abomination, Whosoever Harms the Hulk. So we've got a Hulk cover. We had Heidi MacDonald complaining about the Abomination as created by, penciled, and inked by Gil Kane last issue. I think he looks better this issue. I think he looks pretty great here on the cover fighting the Hulk. What do you think about Abomination here on the cover?
I mean, the Abomination looks okay here. He does look a little... I don't know. There's something about him that's just like that. You can tell it's Kane, but it's not like what makes Kane great.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to say. He looks a little like he's put together with little blobs of clay, and they haven't quite been smoothed out and turned into what they're supposed to be yet. You know what I mean? Especially his face there. Anyway, yeah, so I've got mixed feelings about it.
But this is always confusing when we talk about the cover, and then that's actually the second half of the issue. So let's go ahead and get to the first half of the issue. Outside the Gates Waits Death, Submariner Story, a shocking submersible saga by Smilin Stanley and Wild Bill Everett, credited on the same line.
Wait a minute, hold on. Did they reverse the order of these on Marvel Unlimited? Because the first story here is the Hulk story in mine.
Nope. This is like every other issue of Tales to Astonish, has Namor first in the original.
Maybe they also thought it was weird to have the cover refer to the second story, and so they swapped them. Okay, anyway, let's go ahead and do it in the order that it was originally printed.
A shocking submersible saga by Smilin Stanley and Wild Bill Everett, credited on the same line, inked by Dainty Danny Adkins. So we have the Marvel debut of, or at least the superhero book debut of Dan Adkins here, who is going to be a pretty good Marvel inker and occasionally penciler. And, pretty excellent. And I think this is an excellently inked issue. The inks are similar to Everett's own inks, but even more so to a certain extent. Everett likes to give figures a lot of depth and shadow and solidity, and I think Adkins is doing so even more here. Adkins would become somewhat infamous as a penciler for doing a lot of swiping, but as an inker, that's obviously not an issue, and he does a pretty good job here. What do you think of Adkins inking?
Honestly, going through this, I don't know if I even really noticed much that it wasn't Everett inking himself. So I think that's a good sign.
Yeah. So then, once again, we have Bira, Namor's cousin, who comes up with the entirely good idea of saying, I want to do a plebiscite. We should have a democracy. It's like, that's great. Well, then it turns out that the way he did it was that he used a hypno ray to turn everybody against Namor. It's not like Namor has been a problematic ruler at all. It's not like you could have made an actual good case that Namor should not be the dictator of Atlantis anymore. But in this case, turns out the only way to actually defeat him is to use a hypno ray. And turns out not only is he bringing himself into power, but he brings back Atuma and Krang with him. They're sitting there as a sort of troika, just to make it very clear he's a bad guy.
Let me just say here, once again, if you don't want to hear anything about modern politics, you might want to skip forward about 10 minutes because it's about to come up because of what's going on.
When we discussed the first half of this issue, I said, gee, Bear is really right about everything. And then I said, and Bear is kind of like Trump. And then I said, oh, it sounds like I'm saying Trump is right about everything. I didn't mean to say that. And you left all that in when you edited the episode. And then I said, vote Kamala Harris, everybody. And you cut that out. And so
I was trying to keep from getting any more political than really felt like it needed to be, but I realized that you wanted that there as your statement going into what we're going into.
Well, because I was afraid the way I phrased it made it sound like, whoops, did I praise Trump? I shouldn't have done that. Wink, wink. I was worried it made it sound like
okay, I see.
I was actually endorsing Trump. Then, of course, 2 days later, I was going like, oh my God, what else could I have done? What else could I have done? And I'm like, well, I could have not cut out where I told people to vote for Kamala Harris. That's something else I could have done.
Because that would have made the difference.
That would have made the difference.
Within a couple of days, he would have had like 80 people or so having listened to the episode. So that would have made the difference.
Yeah. So anyway, let's not talk too much about Trump. The evil triumvirate put Namor in a little rocket that rockets him off to a volcanic island where he's attacked by a volcanic creature. Dorma and Vashti, meanwhile, figure out about the hypno ray. They go ahead and turn it off. And then suddenly everybody's like, wait, why did we turn against Namor? And there was no reason to turn against Namor. And then they go ahead and stand up to the triumvirate and kick them all out of town. Namor kicks the ass of the volcanic monster, comes back, finds that Krang and Atuma have decided to release a tornado weapon for no good reason. And Namor has to come by and destroy it. And Bira literally kicks sand. What's the phrase? Pounds sand. Bira is run out of town on a rail here and is walking off into the distance. Of course, Atlanteans can't really swim, so he's walking. And that's it for this issue. Did you have anything to say about this issue?
Yeah, just a couple things. One is that you keep on saying that, oh, Steve, you want it to be a democracy. And so that's what Bira wants. But that's not, well, and obviously he doesn't actually want that. The thing is, when we talk about a plebiscite, I've heard stuff like that referred to sometimes as one man, one vote, one time. Right? Yeah. which does not a democracy make. That's how you end up with Napoleon. That's how you end up with any number of post-colonial dictators that we had in various countries. Even if Bira were acting in good faith, this would not necessarily match my desire for what I would prefer. And then the other thing is just the whole thing of bringing in the actual enemies of Atlantis to help in government really just feels a little bit too close for comfort at the moment. So
yes, it does.
Anyway, let's put this one aside and we will move on to better things, by which I mean the Hulk story, which again, if you are reading this on Marvel Unlimited, will have appeared as the first story in this book, which is a really weird thing to have done.
Yes. So let's go ahead and talk about Incredible Hulk, a much better story. Well, I won't even say that. I mean, the Namor story was good. It was a good story. It was a well-written, well-penciled, really well-inked issue. And I can't complain about it. I just don't like having to think about the horrible parallels with our modern world. Okay, but this is an excellent back half of the issue. Even more solidly inked, too solidly inked, one might say, a power-packed plethora of pulsating perils. Stan the Manly and Gil Sugarlips Kane, lettered by Artie Simek, so Kane penciling and inking himself. You have talked about how Kane's inking got a bad reputation in the 80s for looking like it was done with a laundry marker, you said?
That's not a good way of saying it. There were many people who would say that, Gil Kane, when he inked himself, looked like he was inking himself with a Sharpie or a laundry marker or whatnot. I always liked that look. Yeah. I liked it as a bold stylistic choice. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there, that I'm not criticizing him for that look. I'm saying I've heard other people criticize that inking style.
I find that the inking lines are a little thick in this issue, and even more so in Captain America this month. We'll talk about it when we get to Captain America. I gotta say, this splash page of this Hulk story is absolutely gorgeous and completely sums up everything that happened last issue. We have the Abomination leaping away, carrying Betty. We have General Thunderbolt Ross and Major Glenn Talbot very upset about this, trying to call him back. We see that they're on a missile base. We see an actual missile set up on a silo. And then taking up the foreground, we see the Hulk passed out, having been defeated by the Abomination. That's it. Boom. That is what we need to know to begin the story. And yes, you can read all about it in the captions, but you don't have to. Ross and Talbot are like, oh, great, the Hulk's dead. My daughter's been kidnapped. What are we going to do? And then they're like, wait, maybe the Hulk isn't dead. Let's see if we can get him to a doctor. They get him to a doctor. And then, whoops, guess what happened? Once again, Rick Jones has run onto the army base, getting chased by men with guns who, for some reason, never shoot him. And
because Talbot is terrible at his job. Talbot's actual job here is basically chief of security. And he can't keep a teenage boy who they all know to look for
yes.
out of like super secure stuff. It's ridiculous.
Every morning they should have a little briefing of what you're going to do today. And it's like, what you're going to do today is keep Rick Jones off this base. Give them a little 8x10 color glossy photo of him. But it turns out Rick Jones saves the day because he gets on base. It's like, I know how you can bring Hulk back to life again. You can use gamma electrodes. And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. We will use gamma electrodes, attach them right to the Hulk's nipples, and send a big shock into him. And it works. It wakes him up. And there is a really nice sequence on page 5 and 6. We've seen this before where Rick is pleading with the Hulk to become calm again and to help be a superhero and to realize that he is Bruce Banner. But this is the most abject Rick has ever gotten, to the extent that the Hulk is walking away while Rick is clinging desperately to his leg and being dragged alongside with actual, dust being kicked up as he's being dragged by the Hulk, as Rick is just pleading and crying with the Hulk. Then finally the Hulk becomes Bruce Banner just as Rick can't hold on any longer. So then really like the sequence again after that, where General Thunderbolt Ross is like, oh, good, you're Bruce Banner. Now I can tell you that Betty's in trouble, and now you can quickly change back to the Hulk and go rescue Betty. And Bruce Banner's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to rescue her as Bruce. And they're like, what are you talking about? Turn to the Hulk, go rescue her. And it's like going, no, first of all, that wouldn't work. He leapt away like hours ago. I wouldn't be able to follow him. And this whole thing makes no sense. You got to give some thought to this plan, buddy. As Bruce Banner, I have something that will summon the Abomination. I have a little pheromone ray that will force the Abomination to come to us. For some reason, bring Petty with him.
So on page 7, I will say there's way too much dialogue on this page, and particularly on panel 5. Page 7, panel 5, it's just really ridiculous. But the other thing on there is the thing that he's going to use to pull this trick is modifying one of the gamma machines to send out infra gamma beams, which he won't be able to resist. And I will point out that if anything was going to be called infra gamma beams, that's X-rays. That's just X-rays. But, that's fine. Okay, let's go on.
Yeah, I didn't really believe that the Abomination, if he was being summoned back, would have necessarily brought Betty back with him. I think he probably just would have dumped her wherever he had her. But anyway, it works fine. He brings her back, and then he and the Hulk get in another huge fight. And then, just when it seems like they had completely forgotten about the Stranger says, I'm back on planet to check in on my plan to have the Hulk destroy the world. And I have quickly realized I shouldn't have the Hulk destroy the world. I should have that guy destroy the world. The Hulk is clearly built to be a good guy and is deep down a good guy. This guy is deep down not a good guy. He is going to serve my purposes a lot better. So now we're not going to destroy the world right away, but in the future, I'll now have the gamma-themed goon I always wanted, and I will take the Abomination go away. And then they're like, oh, good, Hulk, you've saved the day. And Hulk's like, Hulk must be free. Hulk must go. And where the Hulk walks, he walks alone. So we've got lots of wrap-ups this month. We've got a big wrap-up in Namor. We've got a big wrap-up here in the Hulk. The Hulk used to be the world's longest Shaggy Dog story, where years would go by of just cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger. Well, we had a pretty definitive wrap-up 3 issues ago. And now after this 3-issue Stranger Abomination storyline, we've got a very definitive wrap-up here. It says next, the new chapter. So, they're really rebooting the book here for the second time in 3 issues. But I think this is an excellent issue. I think it is beautifully penciled and inked by Gil Kane. And I think it's a satisfying wrap-up of both the Abomination and Stranger storylines. And I've already praised several sequences in this book and the splash page. I really love it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I liked it. I don't really have much to add other than what I have already interjected.
All right, let's finish up this episode with X-Men number 32.
Yes. So, X-Men, beware the Juggernaut, my son. And we have a pretty poor cover here, I would say. Yeah. The drawings of the X-Men are decent. They're okay. But the centerpiece to the cover is the Juggernaut, who is defeating them. And the Juggernaut is just not well drawn.
No.
Not great. And when it comes to the splash page, seems like Roy Thomas was not happy with what Werner Roth did with this splash page based on this little thing. On the splash page, it says, would you believe wondrous Werner couldn't decide whether to start off this ish with a symbolic shot of our vituperous villain or a look-see at our merrymaking mutants. So he tried for both? parentheses, well then, would you believe that we're just plain sneaky and now let the pulsating pyrotechnics begin? I'm
Yes,
like,
they are.
dude.
They are throwing the splash page under the bus, and I disagree. So I'm going to go ahead
Yeah.
and say I like this splash page, and I like this whole issue. I think this is Werner Roth's best issue he's done so far. And I agree. They're like, well, this splash page is certainly ambitious, Werner, but it's, I like you've got this sort of symbolic shadow of the Juggernaut falling across this window. And inside the window, you can see it is Bobby Drake's surprise 18th birthday party at the Greenwich Village Coffee a Cocoa. And I think it really works. I think it really works to have the Juggernaut's shadow falling. And I think the perspective is shockingly good of looking in this window and seeing this party going on. This issue is more of an Archie type issue. We've got a tremendous amount of the love lives of the X-Men here. And I think it's all shockingly well penciled by Werner Roth and shockingly well inked by John Tartaglione. I really like this issue. Okay, I'll let you jump in.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not quite sure I agree quite with the perspective of the window. That does seem a little incongruous to me. But overall, I like what Werner was going for here more than it seems that Roy Thomas did. So, and for the credits, there's an arrow pointing to the credits. And inside the arrow, it says, but before we forget, it's share the blame time again. Stan Lee proudly presents and even edits a Roy Thomas Werner Roth cataphonically cataclysmic co-production. So not catatonic, but cataphonic. Inked by John Tartaglione, lettered by Artie Simak, catered by Honest Irv. So yeah, I'm sure that all of these beatniks at the Coffee A Go-Go love this like traditional birthday party being thrown by a bunch of squares in suits.
Well, I kind of, first of all, I think they would probably be fine with it. But not only are they fine with it, but Bernard the poet decides to go ahead and recite a traditional lyric poem for them. Just to do something different. I think Bobby and Hank are like beloved denizens of this Greenwich Village coffee house now, to the extent where they're like, hey, these are two sort of squarish guys who show up here in suits and ties, but we enjoy hanging out with them. They enjoy hanging out with us. Let's go ahead and have our beatnik poet, who normally does like reading shopping lists as poetry, and have him try to compose, a lyrical ode. I think it's just delightful. I think it's just wonderful while a girl dances around in a catsuit and fishnets. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. It is great. It's just, it is very incongruous. But you're right. They have very much established that they have been hanging out there for a while, always dressed like squares, and that they have made themselves a part of the scene as they are without having to change themselves. All the X-Men end up showing up for this party. Warren ends up bringing Candy Southern around. And oddly enough, in the panel where she is being introduced to everybody, Warren says that he bumped into her at a disco, and for the second time in Marvel Comics, disco is spelled with a K, which I don't know. Somebody hasn't figured out how they want to spell that thing yet.
So I got to say, suddenly there's no more love triangles going on. We've got Scott and Jean seemingly happily paired off. We have Hank and Vera. We have Bobby and Velma, and we have now Warren and Candy. And this is a very chummy gang hanging out on page 3 without any of the love triangles we used to have, which is fine. I'm happy to move on.
Yeah. So on page 4, we find out that what's behind that dungeon door that we've seen Professor X working in front of, and once again, a dungeon? Like, I mean, I guess this is just the basement of an old mansion, but still, it feels weird. But it turns out that
makes sense. We've had this whole thing going on with several months now of like, why does he have a dungeon? Why does he have a big, heavy dungeon door behind him? Well, now we go through the dungeon door, and it turns out, yes, he has an ogre locked up inside his dungeon door. This makes perfect sense.
Yes. It turns out that he has his stepbrother, Kane Marco, who is the Juggernaut, chained up in there. Now, if he's been chained up in there for weeks or months, I don't know how he's been pooping or anything else, but that's something that everybody in every storytelling medium always just seems to ignore. Somebody's imprisoned, and it's just like, you're in a room. And so It's like, okay, sure, fine. Anyway, we get a brief recap of the Juggernaut's origin. Professor X has some kind of process he's going to try to use to take care of the Juggernaut problem once and for all. Back at the Coffee A Go-Go, suddenly they are attacked by a motorcycle gang. Satan's
What?
Saints, which I guess is supposed to be the Hells Angels. They ride their motorcycles in through the window, breaking the glass, and then they are running circles around the round table where Bobby's birthday party is happening. And it is utterly ridiculous. But, somehow Werner Roth is able to pull it off visually somehow. But
He
it is
really
ridiculous.
is. It is shockingly well drawn that they would be able to ride their motorcycles through the window. Now I've been in Greenwich Village clubs, and I can tell you that they don't have room between the tables for motorcycles to drive around. The tables tend to be packed in fairly tightly together in Greenwich Village clubs. But, if you accept that, it's really shockingly well drawn. It's so weird. I feel like there was one incident in 1950 in which a motorcycle gang took over a small town in California for a couple of days, and it really shocked the country, who were sort of horrified by it. And this led to an entire genre of films and pulp novels and everything else in which evil biker gangs were constantly just showing up places and going, "We're here to take over," even though it had basically happened once. And this became a whole thing of the biker gang that suddenly tries to take over a civilized space, which happens here. Because turned out Velma turned down one of the Hells Angels for a date. But I just love this sequence. I love the biker gang in here. And then the X-Men realize they can use their powers very subtly in certain ways to defeat the biker gang. Bobby just coats the floor with ice, which causes them to slip around and crash, which makes sense. Warren and Scott realize they can't really use their powers, so they just react like normal people who are fighting a biker gang. Jean can use her powers. And, the thing is, sorry, I don't mean to steal the issue away from you here, but
Sure.
Here I've done it. With Jean, I've always been very disappointed with how Jean's powers are portrayed visually. And every time Jean has ever done anything in this book, I have thought to myself, what would Tetsuo do? If this was an Akira comic by Katsuhiro Otomo, how much more awesome would it be if we saw Tetsuo using his telekinesis powers as opposed to how Jean uses her telekinesis powers? Well, as I'm reading this, I'm like, well, in this case, I know what Tetsuo would do because I've seen him fight biker gangs. That's sort of his thing. And so I know how cool that would be. But it's shockingly cool when Jean lowers somebody's helmet on him and causes bikes to collide together. It's pretty cool. I'm sorry, this is your issue. I'll let you go.
So I generally agree. One thing I do find is that, and I don't know how much of this is to put on Werner Roth and how much to put on Roy Thomas. I think it's more on Roy Thomas than Roth, but there's way too much talking while there are multiple motorcycles inside a small jazz club and strategizing like, hey, that biker is riding at full speed towards us. Hey, let's whisper about our strategy of how we are going to handle this. Hey, let's go ahead and grab the thing and tilt it on 1, 2, 3. So there's a little too much of that for my taste, but
Oh, sure.
overall, I really like the whole thing. And I like the scene of all of them afterwards outside the club while the police show up. That's just a nice shot of all of them seeing the aftermath of this. Meanwhile, Professor X, who seems, so page 9, what is that coat that he's wearing? Is that supposed to be a lab coat, but they colored it wrong?
I don't know. It's a pretty cool looking coat if it's not a lab coat. It's a long cut suit.
Yeah, it comes down to like the bottom of his thighs there. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, so he's got some kind of brain thing he's supposed to be doing to the Juggernaut to take away his Kiterac powers, if I'm not mistaken. And Professor X is doing some kind of a combo of science and magic because Kiterac is a magical being. So which actually kind of feels sort of Dr. Doomish to me in some weird way.
Yeah.
Anyway, one way or the other, it doesn't work. And Professor X ends up unconscious on the ground while the Juggernaut is free to menace people.
It doesn't work because Factor 3 gets involved. He's like, wait, I can sense a third intelligence interfering in this attempt to reach out to Juggernaut, and then that third intelligence goes out and communicates with Juggernaut. It's like, it's us, Factor 3. We engineered this.
Oh, I missed that entirely. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so Factor 3 is like those two goons who were like, what, the Ogre and... Oh, that's right, it was the Ogre and Banshee.
Right. It was Yoga and Banshee, but
Right.
we eventually determined that they were not Factor 3. They were just working for Factor 3. We still don't know who Factor 3 is.
Okay. So the sequence on the bottom panels of page 11, I mentioned these on the Marvel Comics 1961 and 1986 Facebook group, and there was a lot of opinionated discussion about this based on my assertion. So in this sequence of panels, Bobby is saying goodnight to Zelda when dropping her off at her apartment, and then they have what looks like a relatively chaste kind of kiss. And, you could, up to this point, read that as, once again, if you're thinking about modern day stuff where Bobby is now written as gay, and if you want to try to read back into this stuff, oh, okay, well, this would, be consistent or not. Up to this point, with that chaste little kiss, she seems to be enjoying it more than he is in that particular case. But the following panel really made me think, he really seems like he is genuinely elated at this happening. So I was saying, oh, well, right here, maybe it seems like it doesn't work with that. But then, there's some gay readers who were coming in being like, nah, that would still be consistent. You might be like happy that it's like, oh, I'm finally doing it. Maybe this is what it's supposed to be like,
Right.
or, or just putting on a show for your friends after you kissed her. And then it's like, oh boy, that's fantastic. Inside, you're like, I don't know, but I don't feel anything. So who knows? You can read into that what you wish. Obviously, none of this was intended by the original writer and artist, but I find it fun. And there was definitely an opinionated discussion that we had on that.
That's
so
funny.
You can find that on the Facebook group if you wish.
I just think that's an interesting conversation that you ended up having.
So at the end of the evening, we see Warren Worthington driving up to the X-Men mansion. Presumably, I guess he drove from Westchester County down to New York City, parked in some parking garage, and then now is coming back. He comes in and finds the mansion completely dark, which apparently seems suspicious. And we see a panel that actually does reference back to the last time that they came back and found Magneto had taken over the place. And so that's why he is feeling like there might be a problem here. So he is going around in the dark trying to find out what's going on. He's going up to Professor X's secret lab door. The Beast also shows up and he can't see who this is. And so he attacks the Angel, thinking that the Angel's the bad guy. The lights are finally put back on. All of the X-Men are there in their costumes suddenly. So, good for them, I guess, for being in costume very quickly. Cerebro starts going off, and then they're like, oh my goodness, who is the enemy mutant that this is sensing? And then they see that, like, wait a minute, it's labeled with our names now. We are the enemy mutants. Cerebro is then smashed by ways they don't quite see. They go down to the basement, and somehow, apparently, the stairs were booby-trapped, presumably by Professor X, to turn into a slide. Have we seen that before?
No.
Okay, good. So they end up in a pile on the bottom of the stairs, and then they finally see that they are facing Juggernaut. Juggernaut seems to defeat them all, and then heads off. So the X-Men are left in the basement. There's a water pipe that bursts, so it's now all wet and they're all soggy. They're able to find Professor X's unconscious body, and apparently he is really not doing well. He is breathing almost imperceptibly. So they bring him upstairs, and of course don't call an ambulance or anything. They just put him in bed in his wet suit. And they didn't take him out of his wet suit. I just now noticed that.
Yes.
It's probably not a good idea. So at the end, the Juggernaut is at large, and the X-Men are trying to figure out what to do about their ailing and possibly dying leader. So in the next issue, the invincible, unstoppable Juggernaut on a rampage, plus into the crimson cosmos of Kaitarak or Cyttorak. I've never been quite sure. This one you gotta see, Tiger.
Yep. So 3 of the lamest words in all of literature are I can sense. And this comes up twice in Marvel Comics this month where, the Juggernaut is freed from having been in a catatonic state, is suddenly awake. And he's like, given that I can sense that the X-Men are nowhere in the mansion, then I will do this. Okay, this is just clearly Roy Thomas trying to cover for Werner Roth going like, why is he acting like the X-Men aren't upstairs? Like he can sense that they aren't there. Always drives me nuts. But generally speaking, I just thought this whole issue was shockingly good. Obviously, I've always loved Coffee a Go-Go. I've always loved this setting, and here we have an issue mostly set there, so I'm going to love it. But as I say in my notes, is it just me, or is the art of this party shockingly good? Do I have Stockholm Syndrome? I think I've got Stockholm Syndrome. I think I have been a captive of Werner Roth so long that I'm beginning to identify with my captor. But I just really love this issue.
Matt, let me just go ahead and try to cure you of your Stockholm Syndrome by looking at the third panel of the final page. Look at Professor X's suit and whatnot.
Yeah, it's not great. No, there's no shortage of battling panels in this issue.
Yeah, as you said, all the stuff in the Coffee a Go-Go is fun, if ridiculous. But that's fine. These things are sometimes ridiculous.
All right, I guess that'll be it for this episode. Thanks for coming out, everybody. We will see you soon.
Take care and stay safe out there.
Yeah, try your best. Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to marvelrereadclub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.